Picture this. You step into your backyard right at dawn. A sparrow on the fence stops mid-song. A rabbit nibbling clover freezes mid-bite. Your neighbor's old retriever lifts his head, and his whole body just softens. None of them have heard a single word from you. And yet, in under a second, each one has already made a decision about who you are. What exactly is happening in that half second before you've done anything at all? That's the question. And the honest answer isn't, the animal sees a human and thinks the word human. The real answer is stranger, more layered, and it says almost as much about us as it does about them. So let's get into it. Start with the fact that for most of the animal kingdom, the very first reaction to spotting you isn't a thought at all. It's a reflex, and it runs through a pathway built for speed, not accuracy. What are the impressions of animals when you are close to them? Share your experiences on the comment below. In mammals, visual information about a sudden shape in the environment can reach the amygdala, the brain's threat evaluation center, before it ever reaches the regions responsible for conscious recognition. This shortcut skips the slow, detailed image processing route through the visual cortex, and instead relies on a cruder, faster route through older subcortical structures. It's quick and dirty by design. The animal doesn't need to know it's looking at a person specifically. It only needs to know, in a few milliseconds, whether the shape in front of it is a problem. And the shape matters enormously. A tall, upright, bipedal silhouette is read by an enormous number of prey species as one of the most universally alarming outlines in nature, because across millions of years, that profile has overwhelmingly belonged to predators, including us. Researchers studying everything from deer to ground squirrels have found that animals respond more strongly to a human-shaped outline approaching directly than to the same outline moving past at an angle, and far more strongly than to an animal-shaped silhouette of similar size. Direct approach reads as intent. A sideways path reads as indifference. Your posture is being interpreted before your face even comes into focus. This is also why a deer will sometimes do something that looks, frankly, like the worst possible survival strategy. Instead of running, it freezes. From the outside, this seems backward. But freezing is a calculated bet, not a malfunction. Many predators rely heavily on detecting motion, so an animal that goes rigid is gambling that it hasn't actually been spotted yet, and that movement is the one thing guaranteed to give it away. Bolting too early can convert a maybe into a certainty. So the animal holds perfectly still, heart-hammering, weighing stillness against speed, and only commits to running once the threat is unmistakably close or unmistakably watching. Once that first reflexive filter has been cleared, once you haven't moved like a threat and you're not closing distance, something more interesting starts to happen. The brain's evaluation shifts away from the fast, crude alarm circuit and towards slower, more detailed processing. And for certain species, this is where eye contact becomes the deciding factor. In most animals, a direct stare from a human is read as confrontational, the same way it would be read coming from a rival or a predator, because in the natural world, sustained eye contact is rarely neutral. But there is one major exception that science has only really nailed down in the last decade, and it belongs to the animal sitting on your couch right now. Dogs are, as far as researchers can tell, the only non-primate species that has evolved to use a human stare as a bonding signal instead of a threat signal. A study out of Asabu University in Japan found that when dogs and their owners look into each other's eyes, both species experience a rise in oxytocin, the same hormone involved in the bond between a parent and an infant. The dog gazes. The owner's oxytocin rises. The owner gazes back. The dog's oxytocin rises in turn, and the two species end up locked in a feedback loop that, as far as we know, doesn't naturally exist between humans and any other animal on Earth, including wolves, their closest living relative. Somewhere across thousands of years of domestication, dogs essentially hijacked a hormonal circuit that evolved for human parents and infants and started running it on us. That detail opens up a far stranger phenomenon, one that most people have no idea is even possible. A wide range of animals can recognize you specifically, not just your species, and some of them can hold that memory for years. The clearest demonstration of this comes from crows. A research team at the University of Washington, led by biologist John Marsluff, trapped wild crows on campus while wearing a distinctive rubber mask. They then released the birds unharmed and went about campus in the same mask, and in a separate, friendlier mask, over the following months and years. The crows that had been trapped didn't just remember the dangerous mask. They scolded and mobbed anyone wearing it on sight, for years afterward, while completely ignoring the same person in the neutral mask. Even more strikingly, crows that had never personally been trapped began joining the scolding, having apparently learned which face meant trouble from other crows in the flock. The birds weren't just recognizing a face, they were passing a warning down a kind of social network, treating one specific human as a known, named threat. Elephants do something even more layered. Researchers working with elephant herds in Kenya found that the animals could distinguish between two neighboring ethnic groups, the Maasai, who have historically speared elephants in conflicts over grazing land, and the Kamba, who are largely farmers and pose far less risk. The elephants reacted with visible alarm, bunching defensively and sniffing the air, when they caught the scent of garments that had been worn by Maasai men, but stayed calm around the same garments worn by Kamba men. In a follow-up study, the same research group played recorded human voices speaking a short neutral phrase, and the elephants reacted with more fear to adult male Maasai voices than to female or child voices, or to Kamba voices entirely, even though every recording said the exact same words. The elephants weren't reacting to language, they were reacting to a remembered statistical profile of who, historically, tends to be dangerous. So how far down does this kind of individual recognition go? Further than most people would guess. Researchers at the University of Cambridge trained sheep to recognize and consistently choose photographs of familiar human handlers over photographs of strangers, and the sheep kept performing accurately even when the photos were taken from unfamiliar angles, suggesting the animals had formed something closer to a genuine mental model of a face rather than memorizing a flat image. Horses, in a study from the University of Sussex, were shown photographs of human faces making either an angry or a happy expression with no person actually present. The horses' heart rates climbed noticeably faster when looking at the angry photos, and they were more likely to glance at those photos with their left eye, a pattern associated in several species with processing involving the right hemisphere of the brain, the same hemisphere more strongly tied to threat detection. The horses had never met the people in the photographs. They were reading the expression alone and reacting to it as if it carried real, current information about their safety. A similar pattern shows up every spring in Australia, where magpies become notorious for swooping pedestrians and cyclists during nesting season. Wildlife researchers who have studied this behavior for years have found that it's almost never random. A given magpie will typically target the same handful of specific people, often cyclists wearing a particular helmet or a postal worker on a familiar route, while leaving the rest of the street alone entirely. The bird isn't reacting to humans in general. It has built a short list of individuals it considers risky, usually based on one bad encounter near the nest, and it keeps enforcing that list with precision for weeks, sometimes returning to swoop the exact same person again the moment they reappear, even from a considerable distance, and even if they've changed their route. Here's where this gets philosophically uncomfortable, in a way that thinkers have wrestled with for centuries. For most of Western history, the dominant view was that animals were essentially unthinking machines. The 17th century philosopher René Descartes argued that animals were biological automatons, complex but mindless, reacting to stimuli without anything resembling inner experience. It took until 1872, with the publication of Charles Darwin's The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Animals, for a major scientific figure to seriously argue the opposite, that fear, affection, and distress in animals weren't crude analogues of human emotion, but were, in an evolutionary sense, the same underlying systems we have, simply running in a different species. The debate that split those two views never fully resolved. Modern researchers still navigate it carefully, using something called Lloyd Morgan's canon, a principle laid out by the psychologist C. Lloyd Morgan in 1894, which states that you should never explain an animal's behavior by appealing to a higher mental process if a simpler one will do. It's a guardrail against reading too much humanity into a tilted head or a wagging tail. But as the elephant and crow research shows, sometimes the simplest explanation actually does require admitting that an animal is doing something that looks uncomfortably close to remembering, judging, and even gossiping. It helps to understand how unusual the dog situation really is, because it didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen quickly. In 1959, a Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev began an experiment that is still running today at a research institute in Novosibirsk. He took silver foxes, animals that are by nature fearful and aggressive toward people, and in each generation he bred only the calmest individuals, the ones least afraid of human contact. Within just a handful of generations, something remarkable started happening that nobody had specifically bred for. The foxes began developing floppy ears, curled tails, and patches of color in their fur, traits never seen in wild foxes. Selecting purely for tameness had apparently dragged a whole cluster of physical traits along with it, traits that strongly resemble the differences between wolves and dogs. The experiment is widely considered the closest thing science has to watching domestication happen in real time, and it suggests that somewhere in deep prehistory, the wolves that tolerated proximity to human camps best didn't just become friendlier. Their entire biology started to shift around that single trait, eventually producing an animal wired to read your face the way another human would. Even outside of dogs, though, animals are constantly being shaped by exposure to us in ways that have nothing to do with affection and everything to do with risk calculation. Wildlife biologists describe this using two related concepts: neophobia, a default caution toward anything new or unfamiliar, and habituation, the gradual fading of that caution after repeated encounters that turn out to be harmless. This is why a fox in a quiet rural area will often bolt at the first sight of you, while a fox living in a city park might barely glance up. It isn't that the urban fox has decided humans are good, it has simply run the numbers, over hundreds of encounters, and recalculated the odds. There's also a more subtle layer researchers have uncovered, involving the simple feeling of being watched. Several studies on nesting birds have found that nests decorated with crude images of eyes, nothing more than two painted dots, are raided by predators less often than unmarked nests nearby, suggesting that something resembling a watched feeling can be triggered by an eye-like pattern alone, independent of any real attention behind it. Even the impression of observation changes behavior, in birds defending a nest and, oddly enough, in studies of human honesty as well. Put all of this together, and the picture that emerges is this. When an animal looks at you, it isn't running one calculation. It's running several, layered on top of each other, often in the space of a heartbeat. There's the ancient, reflexive read of your silhouette and your trajectory, asking whether you're a predator on approach. There's a slower, more detailed pass weighing your eye contact, your stillness, your scent, sometimes even the color of what you're wearing. For certain species, there's a specific memory file being pulled up, a record of you individually, built and updated across past encounters, sometimes shared and passed along through a social network you'll never witness, the way a crow's warning travels through a flock, or a magpie's grudge gets renewed every breeding season. And underneath all of it, there's a running statistical model, built not from logic, but from thousands of years of consequences, about what creatures shaped roughly like you have tended to mean. None of this requires the animal to have language, or self-reflection, or anything resembling a worldview. It only requires a nervous system tuned by evolution to notice the things that have historically mattered for survival, and a memory system capable of updating that tuning when the evidence changes. A crow doesn't need to understand why the mask was dangerous. It only needs to know that it was, and to act on that knowledge with total conviction the next time the shape reappears. What's worth sitting with, especially if you spend any time around animals, is that almost none of this is decided by what you say or what you intend. It's decided by what your body is actually doing while you think you're simply standing there. Your walking speed, the line of your gaze, the tension in your shoulders, the rhythm of your breathing, these are the signals an animal is actually reading, often more accurately than the people around you are reading them. A calm, steady presence reads as calm and steady whether or not you've said a single reassuring word. A tense, hurried, unpredictable presence reads as exactly that, no matter how friendly your intentions are. In a strange way, animals hold us to a kind of honesty most humans have gotten very good at avoiding. They don't listen to your explanation of who you are. They watch what you actually do, second by second, and they respond to that. That's not a bad standard to hold yourself to. The people, and the animals, who consistently put others at ease aren't usually the ones with the best words. They're the ones whose calm is real rather than performed, whose presence matches their intention closely enough that nothing about them needs decoding. You can't talk a frightened animal into trusting you, and it turns out you mostly can't talk a person into it either. Trust gets built the same way it's read, through steady, repeated, low-drama proof that you are what you appear to be. So the next time a dog leans into your hand instead of pulling away, or a wary bird decides not to fly, take it as a small, honest piece of feedback. Something in you, in that moment, came across as safe. That's worth being on purpose. If you enjoyed this video, stick around for the next one. Like, subscribe, and join us for more amazing discoveries.